taking some time on these first ones. I guess that's what you get when you get a bunch of pastors together, right? Derek, I'm going to jump to you for this one. Someone sent in a really long message. I'm not going to quote the whole entire thing. I'm just going to narrow it down here. The person was speaking against bringing in refugees or immigrants into the country. And they basically said, we can't even take care of the people that are already in the United States of America. So why should we take more in? How do you respond to something like that?
That is definitely a tension that we feel, right? And you can see that just going down the streets. I think of going down Minneapolis. Not just in Minneapolis, just go down 94 and get off on an exit ramp, and you see people with signs that are hurting and need food and all that kind of stuff. So, I think where I struggle with the question a little bit is saying, hey, we're so irresponsible. Don't send more on our plate because we will just fail even worse. I mean, it's almost like to some degree, it almost reminds me that we're just not going to do it. So why be more responsible? And I think for me, where I wrestle a lot with questions like this, and maybe stances a little bit with this, is it almost breaks down that our responsibility is just taking care of Americans, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think the bigger question is this, that if we look at people, like if I value Tom and Scott because they are born in the U.S. more than I value someone because they were born in Australia or in Africa or whatever that is, I think it starts with not having a really good picture of our Creator, and what our Creator created is beautiful and in His image. And so to some degree I got to back up and say my call is not just to take care of the people within my territory. Mm. And so in the midst of that, I've got to see a God picture here, right? And to think that God hasn't provided enough resources for everyone to be taken care of is just absurd. I mean, we just have way too much stuff. And so I think the personal challenge that we have to do in this is this. I mean, we're sitting in a country that's in the top 10%, even higher than that, right? I mean, we have so much resource, and we don't even know what to do with it, and yet we feel like we're under-resourced. We're not under-resourced. We're just we're pride-filled. We love the lifestyle that we have, and we're just unwilling to take care of the people that God has brought to us to even take care of. And so, first of all, I just think we're irresponsible.
I'm glad he's answering this.
Well, and I mean it from this standpoint. I don't think it's one person. I think we all are. I am. I fight this all the time. And Chris and I have a lot of conversations. What does this look like when we live out the way God's called us to live out with the resources God is blessed us tremendously in not just this community, but in our state and the lives that we have. And we keep way too much for ourselves. And so I'm convicted myself as much. I love, you look at the whole thing about the Old Testament, right? In the Old Testament, you constantly hear God telling us to take care of each other, right? Take care of the fatherless, take care of the widow, invite people into, in fact, Deuteronomy comes in and he says, love the alien, give food and clothing to them. I mean, these are questions directly, or statements directly from God. I think about the disciples when he would send them out to all over the place, right? He said, okay, hey, basically, here's what. Your whole livelihood is going to be living off of other people. You're going to go into their place, and it is the church's job to take care of you as you have your mission to spread the gospel. And you go into that place, and they experience this all the time. They get to that place, right? And sometimes they say, we don't want you here. He said, well, just shake your sandals. Shake your sandals and go to some place that's going to take care of you. But the way the gospel spread was they would go into all these places and they would embrace them. They would take care of them. They shared their resources together. And sometimes they would give their resources and say, okay, now go back to that place because they don't have resources. And so here's some resources so they have that. And I think that's what happens when the world sees the church being what God has called the church to be, which is take care of whoever, because all were created in His image. Then you see movement. gospel move in a powerful way.
Maybe another thing that's interesting too is a lot of them were sent out of Antioch, which is in Syria.
Yeah.
You know, it's
True.
like, oh, maybe we should have accepted the Syrian refugees back in that era. So
Interesting.
Yeah, I've got a couple things to say on this.
Bring the
I'm
gospel.
going to disagree with you.
No, I'm not going to disagree with that. But, I think it does start right at home, right? So there is an issue where we see struggles. And again, this is a complicated issue. A lot of those folks that are holding signs, right, maybe have mental illness or whatnot. There are resources in this country where no one is going to go unfed or not taken care of. But there's a lot that kind of goes into it. I think another, though, is just our perception of refugees. I was at an interesting meeting a couple weeks ago with the president of World Vision, and Derek was there as well, and talked about these refugee camps. And just imagine living in a place for 17 years. For 17 years, a lot of them have been there that long or longer. 17 years, you can't have a job because they're afraid it will take away the work of the locals, so you're trying to work in a black market or whatnot. One of the families that our congregation adopted that came from Burma dealt with the same thing. I think they were in the refugee camp 12 years, something like that, and couldn't work. I mean, just imagine what that would do to your self-esteem and your family, the dynamics of 17 years in basically a cage. I mean, just unbelievable to think that what that does to a person's just humanity. But it's hard for us to get to that place again when we're sitting on our couch or whatnot. We shouldn't feel guilty or bad that we've been blessed in these ways. The question is, how do we wrestle with that? Like you're talking about, Derek, do I need this new car? Do we need a bigger house? Or what are decisions that we can make along the way that can eventually help these folks? A couple other things that I learned that were just fascinating. Of the Syrian refugees, 80% of them are women and children who are trying to get away from the same people we're trying to get away from, right? We have this idea that maybe all of them are radicals or whatnot. It's the radicals that are destroying their homes that they're trying to get away from, which is why they've been displaced. That's not to say that there's not a few that have made their way with them, but the vast majority are not radicalized, if you want to use that term. And the vast majority, 95% of them, want to go back home. Think for a moment, would you want to move to Vietnam, or would you want to move to China, or would you want to move to Mongolia if your home was taken from you? You'd want to come back home. And so the keepsakes that these people have in the camps with them are really amazing. They talk about how they had gardens at home. They talk about their homes, and they talk about how they had their houses decorated, and they talk about their neighborhoods and the things that they like to do together as a family. And it's all just gone, and they yearn, many of them, for that again. Now there are some that are like, I'm done, right? And we'd be the same way, and we want a fresh start, and we want something new. And we can offer that in a way that doesn't put our country at risk, in a way that doesn't suck away all of our resources, again, if you want to use that term, but also honors God and His call to us to provide for the refugee. And we have a history of that at our church right here. In the early 70s, we welcomed a Vietnamese family into our congregation that was displaced through the Vietnam War. And I remember because we've got a model of the ship that they actually escaped on. And several months ago, that family, along with their extended family, were all in worship with us, almost 40 of them. Right? So you think about what happens when we do what we're called to do. And again, you vet it out, you do it properly, but you don't come at it from an angle of fear. Right? Enough, again, with this fear-mongering. Go to Chicago, and it's probably more dangerous to walk downtown Chicago than it is through the streets of Baghdad today. Now, that might be a little hyperbole, but 600 people killed this year, right, in Chicago. That's 6 hours from here. So let's not pretend it's perfect. So maybe that's a reason not to bring anyone else here. I don't know.
But I tell you, I love, and I get so excited to see, like, for example, one of the big things that we're doing now is the refugee ministry. And I love to see the heart of our people who, in fact, we just announced it, I think, last week at the Oak Hill, that one coming in. And I walk in on Monday, and there's a pile of stuff that's here to help out. And I think even with this, with the question in particular, let's start with the people on the streets. Let's start with the people that are here. Not to say, well, let's not have them because we're not doing that. Let's do both. And certainly let's start with the people that are out there. And that's got to start with my heart and looking for daily opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Well, we just have a couple questions left here, but
Shut the vicar out of that.
yeah, I'm going to get him for this question.
I agree.
I agree.
It's channeling my arcanes and politicians. I agree.
Nice.
100% behind that.
We just got a few questions left here, and just for time, I'd ask that you guys just kind of do it like we did towards the end last time. Just one of you answer, unless one of you has really something to add on to it. Scott, we'll go to you with this one. You talked about Nero and how God uses persecution to advance his kingdom in your sermon this weekend. But someone was asking this question: if we submit to our leaders, and yeah, we're supposed to submit to them and pray for them, but Scott, you mentioned emphasizing submit to the leaders. And so if laws are made to persecute Christians, does that mean that Christians should no longer submit to that form of earthly authority? Rather, they should be submitting to God. This person said, if a leader is against what you believe, there are probably laws against it. So in this case, is it still submitting, or is it accepting what the leaders say and not fighting them, rather humbly and firmly standing in your faith while under attack?
I just think you have to go back to the scriptures in the early church history. The reason why the church spread so rapidly is because they didn't do what was expected. We expect human beings to stand up against tyranny and to resist when someone tries to undercut the things we believe in. But when we don't do that, it makes people ask the question, why? And what a perfect example for us to say, well, because I believe in Jesus. And I watched in his life when he was unjustly arrested, unjustly tried, unjustly killed, he didn't complain, he didn't do anything. He accepted the authority because, as he said, it came from his Father, and no authority that was over him was of Pontius Pilate's own authority, but it was God using Pilate to accomplish what God wanted to accomplish. Same thing with Nero. You could say, well, Nero horribly persecuted Christians, so yeah, they should have stood up against him, but the Christians didn't. They actually prayed for Nero. They actually prayed for good government. And in the course of that, people said, well, why are you not resisting like everyone else in the world would? And in the midst of that, people started to hear and understand and begin to believe in this Christian movement. And it really led to a revolution at that time that caused the words of Christ and the gospel to spread faster than it would have otherwise. So in the midst of increasing, you could call it persecution, although let's be honest, we're not horribly persecuted here in America like a lot of people are throughout the world. But in the midst of increased, maybe we'll say pressure against Christianity, I think that it's a good thing, actually. It's something that allows us to stand for what we believe in rather than standing against the government. We still pray for them. And I think we said earlier that it allows people around us to see that we are still praying and go, why are you doing that? Well, let me tell you about my Savior, Jesus Christ, and why I do what I do. And what a great opportunity to witness through that. So
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tension of being in the world and not of it. Like, authorities make laws, but that doesn't mean that we follow the laws that are against what God says.
Yeah.
But yet at the exact same time, we're not beating down anybody's door, right? Instead we're praying for them, which is a weird tension to live in. I feel like that's all we talk about for these 2 weeks, is just living in some sort of a tension. Yeah, exactly. Tom, I'm going to ask you this question then. Someone very rightly, in my opinion at least, noticed that Lutherans seem to have either a dislike for the word social justice or the term social justice, or at least a fear of it. You mentioned it in a variety of different places. You talked about seeking justice for the poor and oppressed. with Isaiah and Proverbs and Luke in your sermon this weekend. Why are Lutherans scared of social justice sometimes? Should we be? And what does that look like?
So amazingly, we really led the way in social justice efforts as a synod for lots of years. You might not know this, but we actually marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and had a lot to say about racial issues in our country in the day. And something happened when there was a division, when the ELCA split off. Not to disparage the ELCA, but they really came to focus on social justice ministries, and I think they hijacked sort of what that actually means, and what they meant by that or mean by that often is we do social justice ministry but sort of divorce it from the gospel. And so we're going to love people and take care of people and feed people and clothe people, which is all really good, but we don't want to offend anyone, so we're also not going to talk about Jesus as we do those things, because we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable or upset. What I see in Scripture is it's a both and, it's not an either or. And I wish we could recapture this idea of social justice, I don't know if you like that term or not, but in such a way that doesn't divorce it from really the power behind why we do it, which is the gospel of Jesus, who changes lives. And so I think that's probably why we're scared of it. Works, anything works, right? We're afraid we'll think, well, then maybe we're saved because we've done enough good stuff and it wasn't all by grace. And so sometimes we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we forget, no, that there's good stuff in feeding people, there's good stuff in clothing people, there's good stuff in seeking justice for the poor and oppressed. But let's just not forget why we do that. It's the power of the gospel that moves us and motivates us to do those things.
Yeah, that's great. Just one last question, then I'm going to have you guys all just briefly answer the last question. That's what we're going to do. But Derek, this one, I love this question. Actually, it shows someone is really thinking about this topic. It's actually a school teacher in a public school setting that texted in this question. And they said, as a teacher, what is my Christian responsibility while teaching in public schools?
Oh, it's so good. And I'm gonna think about this question through my son and daughter and daughters who are in the public school system right now. Here's what I want, what I'd love to see them do, and I'm sure that they're doing, is to love the kids, to love them with the love of Jesus, to be the best teachers they can possibly be. Watching what's going on in their lives, to look for moments to pick kids up when they're having a really bad day, look for ways to encourage the gifts that they've got, to do the best that they can with not only God's given gifts that He's given them, but to lift those other gifts up that God's given those kids, to lift them up and encourage them to do that. We are so blessed. We come home and listen to our kids who talk about the teachers and what they're doing, and I think, because I know it's incredibly tricky today, because I know there are many teachers who've been in trouble because of some of the stances they've taken, and they've gone a little further than they should be on both sides of the way, and so I know it's a tricky place, which means we should be praying for our school teachers in situations like this. But the power and the impact that they have on these kids, we see it every day when our kids come home. And be the best teacher you can be with the love of Jesus. And so you can do that. People know, kids know the faith and the standing that teachers have. They know it. They can see it by the way they live. And as a parent who can observe on a very short moments of time, teachers' conference and things like that, you can see it. You can just see it. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Good advice for that one. Just kind of combining a bunch of questions that people asked, I'm going to have you guys each just give me two really short statements. One, simply as we're just a couple weeks now away from the election, but also realizing that we're going to be looking forward to future elections and thinking about our politics and our faith in the future. It doesn't just end here. But just two things from you. Scott, we'll start with you. One, how do we as Christians break the cycle of being manipulated by both parties into whether it be fear or whatever that kind of negative thinking is. So how do we stand firm in our faith? And then also, what's one thing that we can do to help others who are fearing about this election, whether they're Christian or not?
I think the answers are kind of both. We just turn to God as our ultimate authority. When you're looking at how do we stop manipulation by the parties, don't care about it. I mean, it's important because it affects our lives, but it doesn't affect our salvation, our eternal life, or our ability to serve our neighbor. And that truly is what's important. So if we live our lives as Christians, it doesn't really matter that we're being manipulated by politicians. And what was the second question again?
How do we help those who are afraid with the election?
So help those who are afraid by reminding them that God is in control. I mean, that's pretty much as simple as that.
Yeah. Tom?
Same two questions?
Yeah, just brief statements on both.
I was gearing up for Yeah, I think one, be a good citizen, right? So that helps you to know what's going on. The challenge is, right, where do we get all our opinions from? We get all our opinions from the news. And the news's opinions are all opinions, and they all slant one way or the other. So one of the challenges is to how do you ever know what's true and what's manipulation and what's not being spun? It seems like they can have the same number about our national debt. I just saw a couple of graphs on this, and one was from a Trump supporter talking about how during Obama's presidency it's gotten as big as it ever has, and then I saw another graph that said that our national deficit this last year was as small as it's ever been. So I guess we're losing money not at as fast of a rate as we had been before. And I look at it and I don't know what to believe, right? But I know one's from Fox News and one's from MSNBC, right? And so you can guess which is with which graph. And so I think in the midst of that, you might never know, but do your duty as a citizen to be informed of the issues and do your best to try to sift your way through it. But spend more time reading your Bible than trying to sift your way through it. And then secondly, again, the fear issue. Go back to whose we are. That's one thing I never sensed out of the apostles in the book of Acts was there was never fear. And they're getting beaten up and lashed and killed and hung upside down. When you have the power of Christ living in you,
There is no fear.
yeah, perfect love drives out fear.
All right, bring it home, Derek.
All right, I'll try to be real simple on this. I think the first thing, and I'll go off a little bit what these two said. I think the first thing is we talked a lot about next step, right? Discipleship. And I think one of the things that really came out of this series for me is the importance of taking the next step. So a lot of us say voting is it, right? I think there's a next step to say, hey, let's get more involved. A lot of people watch the news. There's a next step. Let's make sure that we go down to New Life Family Centers and volunteer and to be a part of the solution. Because frankly, I have way more hope in people getting involved and loving their neighbors than I do from any political party at any election at any time. So that would be that one. The second one would be this. I remember it was, I can't remember the book, but they talked about when people get into fear, the best question sometimes to ask is, what's the worst that could happen? And I thought about that a lot in this election is what is the worst thing that could happen if either of them run, or if either of them get into the thing. And I've had a little fun with that kind of a thing. And then I started thinking about really what's the worst thing that can happen. And I think right now, the worst thing that could happen is I've got two neighbors who don't know Jesus. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing that could happen is not for me, but if Jesus were to come back within this 4-year cycle, the worst thing that could happen is that they don't know Jesus. And to me, then it takes my mind off of a lot more off of the urgency of the politics and this election, and it takes it to the urgency of our true discipleship gospel, our true discipleship mission, and that is to bring the gospel to all nations.
Preach. All right. Thanks, guys, for your roundtable discussions on this. Thank you guys for watching all the parts in this series. I know this week was a little bit longer, so we had to break it up into parts. I hope you've enjoyed this last 2 weeks of discussions and this sermon series. I hope you also are going to be joining us this next weekend and coming weekends as we're starting a brand new sermon series, Greater Still. Hope to see all of you guys this weekend. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.